Aloha, happy Friday, and welcome to the last Hawaii is My Mainland of 2015. And it's the first time I have a repeat guest. Anukriti Hittle is freshly back on island from the COP21 in Paris, and I want the first word to be council, and it's not of parties, it's committee of parties. Is that right? Sorry, never mind.
It's the conference of the parties.
Conference of the parties. That's right. That's why everybody calls it the COP, because
no one can
doesn't
remember.
make any sense. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, they confer.
So last time you were sitting here, we were talking about what could happen, what might happen. Now we get to talk about what did happen. So you went to Paris for the second week, is that right?
That's right.
And you were officially there because you were taking some students with you. Mm-hmm. So what was it like?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. And it's always an honor to be here. So, well, being in Paris was really interesting, and being at the COP was even more interesting. Taking my students was very exciting. These are students from Washington University in St. Louis, where I'm an instructor, and I'm visiting here for the year. So what was it like? It was really exciting because for the first time, 195 countries and the European Union, so 196 parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. For the first time, they have come together to agree on a collective 2-degree warming goal, or under 2 degrees. So they've all agreed to do something to keep to this goal. And that's really exciting because we've been trying to get to this point since 1992.
1992, and how long have you been actively following it? Anu, I know it's quite a while.
Well, I've actively, through the COP process, only I'm sort of a newbie at it, so I'm by no means an expert. If people are tweeting in, please don't tweet in anything too difficult for me. But I've been taking the students for 2 years. I've been following climate change issues since 1989, but not the specific UNFCCC, because in 1989 it actually didn't exist. So,
the UNFCCC, for not everybody who knows what that is
the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Right.
And so we call that the UNFCCC because it just is such a mouthful. But that was the general agreement that we should do something about climate. The Earth is warming and it's changing, its climate is changing, and that was just that general agreement. And there were 196 parties to that.
In 1992?
They met in 1992, it came into force in 1994, and in 1995 is when we had the first COP, the Conference of the Parties, where they met to discuss what they're going to do towards this goal, whatever the goal might be, which is something to do, they need to do something about climate change. And so that was in 1995, and so this past week, that was COP21, that's 2015.
I'm not hearing anything. I'm not hearing anything. Oh, there you go. Okay. Okay. So fast forward from that to last week. Mm-hmm. You were there with your students, and what was it like? How did it feel to be in Paris?
Well, Paris was interesting because, this was just 2-3 weeks after the terror attacks. And so there was an interesting, almost eerie quality to being there. It was very well organized. The whole, I thought more than anything we would be inconvenienced by long security lines, and that really wasn't the case. The French government and the UN Secretariat put up a wonderful, very well organized conference, and we really didn't have to wait in line anywhere. We didn't have to wait on security checks. There was a lot of support for that. So that part of it, it was a bit eerie to see gunmen and police with big guns everywhere.
Yeah, but that's sort of normal for Paris. When I was there this summer, there were guys walking around with machine guns all over the place, and When I was there 2 years ago, it was the same thing. So we can't
Right.
blame that on the COP, actually.
Yes, no, that wasn't the COP, but that was just Paris and the terror attacks. But the COP itself is it's a pop-up city. So this was in a venue that's an old airport, a little outside of Paris. It's called Le Bourget. Le Bourget.
Sounds
My
good.
French. Anyway, so they had basically constructed a whole city for 40,000 participants.
Wow, 40,000.
It's a bit like Burning Man. Hopefully we left it
Low
like we
carbon
found.
Burning Man.
Hopefully we didn't burn
Was-
much.
Were they actually, did you feel like there was a lot of attention paid to climate change in the way things were done? Like water dispensaries instead of water bottles?
Oh, absolutely.
Or all that kind of thing?
Absolutely. There were a lot of sustainable type things there, and every participant got a recycled sweater bag which contained certain goodies, and one of those was a water bottle that was all made from recycled materials, and then there were water dispensers everywhere, and there were recycling containers, composting bins. There were, I don't know if we're going to be able to see that, but there were sort of areas where you could.
Oh, yes. We have some cute photos of the that you took. Maybe Zuriel fire those up. Ah, there you go.
All right, so what was it like to be at the COP? So this is actually me talking to a student of mine, and we were sitting right behind the delegate from Venezuela, and this was in the negotiations that were open to all of us. We went as observers. And this is with the executive secretary of the UNFCCC, Christiana Figueres, who was an absolute star. I really admire how she handled everything. She gave a briefing to the observers, and this is some of the indigenous peoples of Peru who had come to give her a little present and a ceremony to hope that she paddles in the right direction.
Excellent.
And this is typical of some of these the things that went on at the COP. These are people generating power for their laptops while sitting and cycling. So. So that's one of the things they were doing. Now, if you get the impression that this is all very trivial, it makes it seem like it's very trivial, but really there are a number of things going on at the COP. So the main thing that's going on is the negotiations, right? And that's the parties to the convention. So that's the Conference of the Parties. All the countries send their delegations, their negotiators, to sign on to whatever is being discussed, okay? So that's the main show.
That's the main show. And you said that this summer, you told me earlier, that this summer that document was 400-some pages, but by the time you got there, it was...
Well, by the time we got out of there, the final document is about 38 pages or something like that.
So there was real work to be done.
Yes.
At
That's right. And so this has been the end of the culmination of a 4-year process, really. In 2011, in Durban, they decided that they wanted to have an agreement for signing by 2015, one that would come into effect in 2020.
2020. So we're signing it. We have 2 years to sign, and then it goes into effect in 2020.
It will actually be open for signing in April of 2016, and they will keep it open for a year. And then in 2020, it will go into effect. And that's the end, at that time, it's the end of this gets very jargony, but it's the end of the Kyoto Protocol period, which we don't need to get into that here because we may not have time. But essentially, this is the culmination of a 4-year process. But there was still a lot of work to be done all year. The Conference of the Parties, the parties themselves have been meeting they've met 4 times over the course of the year. The document burgeoned, and then it came down into a few hundred pages, and then it went back up again, and so it's been going back and forth, and then they knew that they had to really do some work here in these 2 weeks, and they did come through. So that was very exciting, and of course, towards the last minute, we're all standing there and thinking, when is it going to come out? And so, it really got exciting even for, I would say, our students, but also other people. It's not just that you have to be one of these policy nerds to really get excited by this. There is quite a bit of drama at the COP. So there are the negotiations, and you can see how each country positions itself at those negotiations, provided they're open to the observers. Sometimes they're closed. Then you have this, what they call the side events, which is what civil society will put up. So you will have panel events and demonstrations, press briefings, all of these things. These are all influencing each other. So this is where it's really different. This is peace at work.
Peace at work. Oh, I love that phrase. I have a graphic that shows, that was from one of those side events that was done by Elon Musk, one of my personal heroes. Maybe we can have a look at Elon Musk did a graphic of, in just a one shot, I thought, you know, let's do something to put this whole 20-year process in perspective. How did we get to where we need to have a COP? How did we get to where, you know, the UN is saying that here we are? You know, the pre-industrial range, you know, wasn't that long ago. And the acceleration rate on that graph was like, oh, okay, I get it. That's why we need to be a civil society and getting along. And it really is going to take all of us when you see that graph. And so somehow it's taken 20 years, but this process it sounds like it's really working, actually. In spite of the naysayers. We'll get to the naysayers later, but something has happened that is significant.
Well, for the first time, as I mentioned, countries have come together, and every country has agreed to do something. Some have agreed to do more, some have agreed to do less, but there has been an ambition from every country to do something, and countries have pressured each other in the best way possible to come up with more ambition, is what they're calling it.
Oh, it's actually called ambition.
Yes, it is actually called ambition, and all countries have agreed to put forward what they call their nationally determined contributions towards this issue. So it's not a contribution that someone else is telling them to do something about. They have come up with it on their own, so it's a very bottom-up approach, but at the same time there will be, from the top down, some monitoring, reporting, verification, all of those things.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's look at the videos. You had talked earlier about each country being having its own, or not each country, but several of the countries had their pavilions and shared what they were having. I think you have a very group. What's that? What is that?
That's actually a fountain. And as you can see, actually, the India pavilion, that was a really quick shot, but it was quite deserted in some ways because you can see what the Germans have done. They've put in couches, and they had free coffee, and they had Wi-Fi and computer stations, and so yeah, you can see that that was India, and there's Germany. So they all had their own thing going, and there was a lot of networking. I got to meet the man who's basically implementing the Energiewende strategy for Germany at the pavilion here. There are events that countries are doing at their pavilions, and the students got to go to those. We got to see Energy Secretary Moniz being interviewed by Al Jazeera. We got to see Al Gore just walking by.
Did you happen to see our Hawaii Senator, Brian Schatz?
You know, I did not happen to see him, but I believe he came in on the weekend between the 2 weeks. And so he came in on the weekend, and I think he made a very quick visit and left. But I think it'll be interesting. We can bring this up again about the small island states and what role they've had in this process.
Okay, that sounds like a good time to take a short little break, and we'll be right back for our COP21 debrief.
Hi, my name's Hillary Weinberg. I'm the host of The Whole Gamut on Think Tech Hawaii. See us live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. or on our YouTube channel to hear us talk about world affairs from Hawaii and beyond. See you then.
Aloha, my name is Kirsten Baumgart Turner, and I'm the host of Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. We air live on the internet and also on Oceanic Channel 16. I'd invite you to come for a fresh new show every Tuesday from 12 to 1 o'clock. I try to bring on guests that give us a different viewpoint on aspects of sustainability in Hawaii, as well as trying to unpack some of the difficult concepts of measuring and achieving sustainability, particularly with regard to sustainable economic growth and prosperity in Hawaii. Please join us every Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. Mahalo, aloha.
We'll be very short on that because
Aloha, this is Kaui Lucas, and we're back with Anukriti. Sorry, Anu.
You can just squish everything and just call me
Squish
Anu.
everything. We got a tweet from Tim Sprouse, who was asking, is there an enforcement provision in the Paris Accord? So let's just take a couple of seconds to deal with that.
Yeah, enforcement with international treaties is a bit tricky. We had, and I'm not a legal scholar, so I'm not going to answer this from a legal perspective, but that was one of the problems with the Kyoto Protocol, is that there were some enforcement mechanisms, but nobody adhered to them, and then they couldn't really be enforced. So with the Paris Agreement, they decided that they were going to have review processes. So there is a review process every 5 years. Every 5 years, there'll be a global stock take, which is how are we doing?
And how is that measured?
There's a pretty complicated sort of
Okay.
system around
All right.
that because every country is reporting differently. So
Okay.
that's also something that will be determined in the next few months, years, maybe even. So yes, but every 5 years, these nationally determined contributions will be reviewed.
And publicized, I would imagine. So
Yes,
then
that's
we
right.
get back to the ambition.
That's right, and to pressure, the peer pressure amongst
Peer pressure.
countries. And that's one way of affecting change and having countries stick with what they've said they will do.
Okay. So did they make those ambitions? Did they make that pretty public? It's like
Oh yes, those are.
graphically, like everybody could see who was going to do what.
Oh yeah, so they're all on the UN's website, and there are several organizations and think tanks that are analyzing them to see what does it mean and so on. We've actually done a paper on it as well, a working paper.
We
Being me and my husband, Alex Hittle, so he's also an analyst. And we ran the models on just how, we just basically did a model on how would it look if we ran these numbers of what China and the US are saying they will do, what will it look like into the future? And so, that's something.
Don't leave us hanging.
You have to read the book. No, I'm just kidding. There isn't a book. What it is that basically, so this takes it a little bit onto the negative side of things, which is even though countries have decided they're going to commit to something, what does it really mean? So going beyond the posturing, right?
Right.
And we're trying to figure out, well, you're saying that you're going to do this. What it's going to mean is that, okay, so the United States and China will emit about 40% of global emissions, leaving 60% to the rest of the world, which, I think sounds a bit unfair because there are two countries that comprise 20% of the world's population, right? So 20% emitting 40%. So that's kind of what we found with the commitments that the US and China have put out. We're going to do a similar analysis of India and the EU and come up with more answers. This is all on our website if you want to look at it at some point. But
And that website is?
well, it's on the Washington University website.
Okay.
So, it's a little complicated to say what
All right,
it is,
I'll do a follow-up post
Yes.
on my blog.
Okay.
Hawaii is
All
my
right.
mainland.
Thank you.
KauiLucas.com.
Yeah, but if they just Google it, they'll find it too, which is, Hittle carbon pie, which is what we call it. Who is eating the carbon pie? And it's mostly China and the US. So that takes it a little bit to the negative side, which is that really what does all this mean? And I want to really stick with the Paris Agreement for a second here and say that this is a success for 196 parties because that's a tough thing to do. So we managed to do that, and that so yes, we should pat ourselves on the back for that. It's been a long process. This is how peace works. It is slow. It's not as fast as we would like sometimes, but this is how it works. It was an open process that everyone liked. Everyone got on board finally and approved and decided that they're going to work this way. So that, you know, I really like that side of things with Paris.
And when you talk about open, that it was actually even open to your young students doing research.
Right, so our students were observers. They're undergraduate students, and most of them, one of them was a graduate student, but they came as observers. Here they are. And we had 3 students the first week and 3 different students the second week, so these were the students I had brought with me. And they were really observing the negotiations. They had spent all semester looking at the document and how it panned out and so on. They were there till about 1:30 in the morning sometimes, and would not come home. I'd say, come home. They wouldn't come home because they were so excited by what was going on. There really is quite a bit of drama, especially towards the end. So this is what our students, we also had a booth for what we call the Young Ringos. And the Ringos are the research and independent non-governmental organizations that are observers to this process. And we are hoping to get them get our young people beyond outrage and into the...
What is that we're looking at?
That is the Plenary Hall. That's one of the Plenary Halls, La Seine. And that's where much of the action happened. If you look at some of the news clips and so on, you'll see this red background, and that's where all of the sort of heads of state were up front, and when they were there at the beginning, we didn't see them because they had vanished by then, which was a good thing. Here are our students and some others from Duke University and a couple other places. They're speaking with Professor Dan Bodansky, who agreed to give us a little class on the particular COP that we were attending, and that was just fabulous because he's been attending these since they started, and he teaches at Arizona State University at the law school. So that was really exciting for us to be able to do that as well.
Oh, and this is one of the protests. I understand that only 50 protesters at a time were allowed to assemble, but they did.
Yes, and there were, so here, this is an important one because this is 1.5 degrees, and when you look at the document, it says 2 degrees, and that's our collective goal, to keep warming under 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. But small island states and a number of civil societies have been advocating for this 1.5 degrees, and it actually got into the document, which it doesn't sound like much, but it is actually a victory to get some of these things into the document because it means that the ambition will ratchet up. We have something to hang our ambition off of, essentially. We can say, oh, there is the 1.5 that we really should be looking at, not 2. And so down the road, hopefully that would be something that we could.
So there's something in there that says the goal is ultimately, by the end of the century, to be off fossil fuels. Right?
Right, and that the warming should be less than 2 degrees. But really, we'd like to have it less than 1.5.
1.5. Mm-hmm. I was at a talk with Sandra, Dr. Steingraber here in Hawaii this week, and she kept saying 1.5, and I was really hoping that she wasn't mistaken, and that's what it was, but she was just terribly jet-lagged, and I think feverish giving this talk. But it had all of us delightedly confused for a while.
Well, but I think that 1.5, it is in the document, and it is something that we would like to see. So
it's in the document as a specific. Is there we're going to get there at a certain time, or we should get there at a certain time?
There isn't a we should
shall,
get there.
Should.
Yeah, shall, should. It isn't, but that is something, it leaves it open when we do the 5-year reviews and so on. It does leave things open for, yes, this is something we're aiming towards, and this is something if, China, India, if you guys want to go towards 1.5 instead of 2 Celsius, then go for it. So it's out there, and it's something that is in the document. If it weren't in the document, we couldn't even aim for it. So it's good. It's good. It's a good thing. I just wanted to come back to a little bit to what some of the young people do at these conferences. And our students and other young people, they're able to go to some of the press briefings, which is excellent. They're able to go to some of the, obviously to some of the negotiations, so they can see that firsthand. Some of them in the graduate schools, I know Vermont Law School does this, they actually help other delegations. So they help parties that don't have big delegations, that are not wealthy enough to send huge delegations, like the United States sends 200 people. So they help those parties to draft statements and to analyze the document as it comes out and so on. So we expand the capacity of some of these as a group.
Wow, that sounds like that would be an amazing thing to do as a student, to get to help those countries.
Yes, and it is also a very participatory kind of a meeting. So it's not just that we're sitting there observing. And someone said to me the other day, well, it sounds like that would be really boring to sit there from 8 in the morning till 1:30 at night.
Really?
But it's not.
Sign me
because
up.
Yeah, because it's not that you're just sitting there. You're actually working, you're observing, you're thinking, and you're talking to people, and it's just extremely tiring, but it's very, very exciting.
How are they communicating if it's that we saw that huge room, but it looked like they're, as you said, it was a pop-up city, so they're, how did they communicate? Okay, we've gotten, 5 more pages cut off, or we've reached the next. How did they handle communications?
Yeah, so that is, you see the table at the end of that plenary hall there, and that's where the president of that particular session is sitting, and then he or she will call on the various parties who get in line for what they want to say. So it's all simultaneously translated into the 5 UN languages, and you get a headset. You can decide which one you can choose, and so the parties essentially this is where they negotiate as a big body. Now, what the COP president, so every COP will have a president from the host country, and from France it was Laurent Fabius, and so he is the foreign minister of France. So he basically said to the parties, he said, go get into small groups, because this huge plenary is like a big elephant. It's not going to accomplish anything. So he broke them up into small groups. There were about 14. Each article was taken and negotiated. And
each article from the document. Okay.
And there were 14 ministers who he assigned to these, and they were called indabas, which I think are like informal gatherings. And so they had these indabas, which he called upon, and he kind of constructed it and said, now you can't go from one indaba to the other if you don't have anything new to say. So everyone agreed he had a great leadership style. And so they communicate in different ways, to get back to your question. So when it's in the plenary, it's that big formal posturing and so on, and in 5 different languages that people are dying and they have all these problems, and I don't want to trivialize it, but that is the posturing that they will do in a big setting. In smaller settings, they really get down to business, and unfortunately, we can't get to see that, but we do hear about it.
Well, more about that after the break.
Aloha! Hello, my name is Patrick Bratton. I'm host of Global Connections here at ThinkTech Hawaii. We broadcast live every Thursday at 1 p.m. We bring Hawaii world and the world to Hawaii, talking about international events and various things of interest to the audience. Please join me. I look forward to talking with you and having you get to meet some of my guests. Aloha.
Aloha! Please join the Hawaii Farmers Series every Thursday on ThinkTech. We live stream from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. and we are
Matthew Johnson and Justine Spiritu as your hosts.
And the purpose of the Hawaii Farmers Series is to get to know our local agriculture community a lot more, get their backgrounds, get their history, find out why they love what they do, as well as get some of their insights.
And insights into hearing about the future of agriculture in Hawaii.
So we're going to bring the experts on, but we'd also like you to be a part of the conversation. So you can always join us by tweeting in your questions and comment at ThinkTech High. So we hope to engage with you. Thanks.
Welcome back to Hawaii is My Mainland. I'm Kaui Lucas, and with me is Anu Hittle, who's freshly back on island from COP21 in Paris. And so we're going to talk about the money side of things. Anu, what happened about that with that fund? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, where the money at, right?
Yeah, where's the money?
Right, so of course that's always the issue, where's the money? So why are we talking about money in the first place? So the argument so far has been, or the debate has been, that historical emitters like the United States and the EU have developed using dirty fuels, and they've brought us to this situation where we are now. And now we have other countries such as China and India, Brazil, South Africa, all these emerging economies with Indonesia with big populations.
Right.
People who want to do the same thing. They want to have the same kind of lifestyle, wealth, prosperity. And some of these countries have got very large reserves of coal and all the traditional fossil fuels. And that's going to mean if they burn that all, it's going to be disaster for our planet, right? And so the point, they've been slinging back and forth this point, which is that, well, you folks are the ones that have brought us to this situation, so you fix it. And the other side has been saying, well, but you guys are the ones that will make it worse, so you need to do something, and you need to be using cleaner fuels. And so if these countries, such as China and India, are going to use cleaner fuels, this is going to mean that they have to transition to an economy that is going to use cleaner fuels, going to basically have less, they're going to decarbonize their economies, right? It's going to use things like wind and solar and those kinds of things. So those technologies are expensive. And what these countries have been saying is that you guys, you historical emitters, you need to subsidize this for us. You need to help us make this transition, because as a global goal, we're trying to get to this place where we want to have cleaner air and warming below 2 degrees, then you need to help us. We can't do this on our own. So that's where the money comes in.
Okay, and how much money are we talking about?
So there is something called the Green Climate Fund, which has been established, and it's been in existence for a couple of years now. They've started putting money into it. They've put in pledges.
This is part of the FCCC thing?
This is part of the UNFCCC. This is part of the whole process. It's the Green Climate Fund. It's called the GCF. It has $100 billion. The goal is $100 billion starting in 2020 every year, okay, to go towards mitigation and adaptation projects. Ooh, that's a mouthful. So to go towards this this transition to clean energy, okay? And to help adapt to some of the problems that climate events have brought. So, $100 billion every year. So they've been taking pledges. They've got about 12 billion or so, somewhere in that range, don't hold me to it, pledged by different countries. The US has pledged 3 billion.
3 billion in 2020, and then for each year thereafter?
Well, then
Or just
hopefully,
for 2020?
Well, hopefully they will ratchet up that ambition as well. And that's the goal, is that countries will begin to put in more and more.
So we're responsible for, well, you said with China, we're responsible for 40%, and then I was thinking, well, 3 billion out of 100 billion. That doesn't seem, we're certainly getting a good deal here.
Right, so this is, this is the problem. Of course, anytime we pledge any money, we have to go through a political process with Congress, and we know what sort of climate we have in Congress right now, and so we're fighting over $3 billion. Let me put this in perspective, okay?
Please, make those numbers human.
Yes, so.
I can't think 3 billion.
Yes, what does that mean? That's a lot of zeros, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so how much do Americans spend on potato chips each year? In 2013, Americans spent $7 billion.
$7 billion.
On potato chips. Crunch, 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 okay? So
Does that include the baked ones?
I hope so, but if not, okay, so that's less than half of what we spend on potato chips. We're fighting in Congress on those kinds of sums, okay?
Wow.
And we spent, now, you know, this may be less of a, we probably don't want to give this up. We could maybe give up potato chips, but, you know, $83 billion on beer
Ooh.
in the US
Okay.
alone. In the US
All
alone.
right. In the U.S. alone.
So together, we have about 100 billion, you know, roughly, but about
Between
90.
the chips and the beer, we're there.
So I'm not saying give up your chips and beer, but what I am saying is that this is pretty trivial. Yeah?
These sums, yes, that's an awesome comparison. Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
So what we've done in Paris, what has happened in Paris, it's progress, but it's not a solution, right? And this is the issue, and I think that's where your naysayers come in. And they say, well, what effect is all this going to have? What effect is Paris going to have? We spent 200 million euros. But again, don't forget, we spent $7 billion on potato chips. So, you know.
The price tag for the COP was 200 million euros, you said. Just
for the
two-
COP, yes,
yeah.
for hosting the COP.
And France was willing to do that, and
It was
I
200
think
million.
200
euros.
million.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems like they should get some kind of a award for that, or give me
Right,
for that.
but it's chump change compared to what we spend on potato chips, right? So, and it's chump change. What we're spending on climate is chump change compared to what we spend on potato chips. So really, I mean, we're pledging chump change, you know. And I really want to just, if I may, just read out a quote from Jeffrey Sachs, who's at Columbia University.
Sure.
Yeah. So what he says is, and this may put the whole thing in perspective, the whole Paris Agreement. The diplomats have done their job. The Paris Agreement points the world in the right direction, and with sophistication and clarity. It does not, however, ensure implementation, which necessarily remains the domain of politicians, businessmen, scientists, engineers, and civil society.
Very nice.
So I think that means that the rest of us need to do our jobs.
I wonder what would happen if we did a Indiegogo campaign for climate change. You know, can we have global Kickstarters? You know, have they tried that? I don't know.
You tell
It
me.
seems like if just in the United States we can come up with $3 billion a year for potato chips. and we
7
can-
billion.
$7 billion a year for potato
Potato
chips. $7 billion for potato chips. And that's not even corn chips. I bet we spend more on corn chips than potato chips, don't you think?
I don't know, but I could find out for you. Maybe someone could tweet it in for us.
If we could, you know, just have little jars on our counter, so every time we spend $5 on potato chips, we put $5 in a jar for air to breathe. Because, you know, at the meeting I went to on Wednesday night, she said, you know, of every other breath comes from plankton. And the other breath that isn't from plankton comes from trees. So when you start thinking about what's happening to trees and what's happening to our oceans, all of a sudden those in-breaths and out-breaths take on a certain gravitas.
Yes.
Perhaps we can think about that in terms of just our own spending habits and potato chips, yeah.
Well, that's one thing, but it's also putting pressure on our governments to change some of the ways that we do business here in Hawaii, everywhere else, at the national level, at the state level, at the city level. And that's really where the action is going to be.
There was an outcome, a pretty good graphic on the outcomes. Zuri, can we see that? There we go. So, 100.
So there's talking about 400 plus cities to set targets that would cut emissions in half. And of course, Honolulu has some pretty aggressive energy goals as well.
Yes, I think we can be proud.
And
climate finance, that's what you were talking about, the
To support
the
developing
global-
countries,
the
that's
green
right.
fund.
That's right, and that's something that that has also been worked a little bit into the agreement, where countries will get, small island nations will get some priorities.
I think these a little further down, the 127 million hectares of degraded land in Africa and Latin America to be restored. That is really exciting. That must have taken some very substantial negotiation for those countries. And then 1 trillion in solar investments.
Right, but of course, don't get too carried away with the numbers, because when I put those other numbers for you in perspective, I mean, just think about our consumer spending and so on. It's quite different from, I mean, I don't know exactly what these, I would like to put these numbers in context somehow, but these are still good efforts. And I would say this is all a starting point. We're going in the right direction. We're paddling in the right direction.
We're paddling in the right directions, yes, bringing it back to Hawaii. I think that we can be very proud with our 2045 goal of being off fossil fuels. But in the context of the COP, it wasn't just about fossil fuels. It's about carbon levels. So that adds so much more to it. So even if we stopped all the fossil fuels, there would still be carbon emissions from other sources.
Yes, but we're also talking about establishing carbon sinks, right? So forests and,
Right.
yeah. So that's all part of that plan.
Was there some exhibit space where they were sort of concentrating on mitigation efforts?
Yes, there were a lot of exhibits and booths, and just, everybody is there, everybody that works on this issue. So you got to figure that 40,000 participants that are there, and they're all doing different things, that they're working on these issues. So I spoke with people from small cities in Norway who are looking at how to adapt to climate change. I spoke with people who are in some of the small island nations.
If you can, was there anything specifically that you thought was very exciting, like, oh wow, if this can be developed, this is really gonna make a difference? Did you have a favorite?
You're sort of putting me on the spot there. What's going to really make a difference? I mean, I think really what's going to happen is things that happen on the ground. That's where the difference, that's where the action is, that's where it's going to make a difference. Not only at the individual level, but again, at that city level. So because cities are our urban, that's where the urban infrastructure is, that's where most of the people live, that's where most of the emissions are.
So putting our efforts into concentrating on urban development and making that.
That's right.
Making that better.
That's right.
Well, and don't we have the perfect background for that today? Thank you, Suri. So thank you, Anu, for coming and chatting with me again. And let's
pleasure.
see what we can do right here in our mainland of Hawaii to help further the discussion and actually lower the emissions here. Yay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
See you next year.